Being an experienced climber and knowing what happens to your ability to make decisions at high altitude is absolutely critical.
You don't get hurt up here, you get dead really quick.
With the members we have, we've worked together on so many trips that we have a ton of respect for each other's risk tolerance levels.
There is no stopping if you start sliding.
And so I think that we all trust each other to judge the objective danger in terms of what Mother Nature has in store for us.
This idea of conquering a mountain is so popular, but you're never conquering a mountain. Like, it's allowing you to come through, because at any moment that mountain could kill you and not care.
These expert climbers know that the only way to maximize your odds of summiting Everest and returning back down to safety is to plan for all contingencies. From the moment you arrive at base camp, every decision you make will determine whether you succeed or fail in your monumental mission.
Mount Everest is 29,035 feet above sea level, its summit, and that's almost the altitude that you're cruising in a transatlantic flight. It's pretty darn high.
The mountain is so huge. It straddles the border between China and Nepal, and most of it is technical, dangerous, avalanche-prone terrain. It's intimidating to me. There are numerous routes for the summit. One popular climbing route, the north route, goes up from Tibet, and one popular climbing route, the south route, goes up from Nepal, and they don't meet until all the way on the summit. I don't find one side to be much more difficult than the other. The north side is generally considered more difficult, and that's because of the rocky steps on summit day, which, when you have a lack of oxygen, make the route feel really serious and very exposed. But when you look at the entire route all the way to base camp to summit, on the south side, the route tends to follow in the bottoms of valleys. Now, that makes it more comfortable because it's not as windy when you're inside a valley. It's not as cold. But what it means is anything that falls off the mountain, ice, rock, snow avalanches, all falls down into the valley, and you're exposed to those hazards.
Actually, no matter what route we climb, everything is exceptionally difficult up high on Everest.
This intimidating climb to the top of Everest is a many-month-long ordeal with life-threatening obstacles at every step. Powerful windstorms, freezing temperatures, unstable terrain, and avalanches. But the greatest threat of all is the extreme altitude. As there is very little oxygen, the human body is not designed to survive such heights. If someone was transported directly from sea level to the summit, their brain and lungs would swell within minutes. They would fall unconscious and soon after perish from exposure.
You okay?
You constantly have this kind of low-grade suffering. At the same time, you're really just gasping, just trying to get the oxygen you need.
It's cold. It's really hard to breathe. I put my oxygen back on.
You are essentially operating on borrowed time.
So how do these expert climbers overcome the challenges of extreme altitude? With a vital process called acclimatization, where over time, they condition their bodies to function at low levels of oxygen. Many climbers begin this process before they even set foot on the mountain. For 6 to 8 weeks, they sleep in hypobaric chambers, which mimic a high-altitude environment and help the body adapt to reduced oxygen levels. But the real work towards acclimatization begins at base camp, which at 17,000 feet is nearly the same altitude as some of the highest peaks in the US.
A traditional expedition to Everest takes about 2 months. The reason it takes so long is your body, even with supplemental oxygen, can't survive these extreme altitudes without weeks and weeks and weeks of acclimatization.
On one expedition, you don't climb Everest once, you climb much of the mountain many times over. And if we have the genetics for it, our body realizes I need to produce more red blood cells, more hemoglobin, so that I can carry and absorb more oxygen. And the only way to do that is to keep pushing into new altitudes, triggering that response of producing red blood cells, then descending back down to rest. That's why we have many different camps set up on the peak. Between base camp and the summit, we've got base camp, advanced base camp, camp 1, 2, and 3, our upper mountain camps. And we'll use all of them at different times during the climb.
Base camp is really pretty comfortable. Got a desk, got a real bed. You want to see this? Imagine electric blankets, hangout tents with an espresso machine and a pool table. Disco light. Disco light. Wow. Anyone hungry? This is why I come back to Everest every year. Where else do you get to eat pork luncheon meat?
This is crazy. This camp, I think, is nicer than my house.
From base camp to advanced base camp is a 2-day walk. And in order to get to advanced base camp, which is at 21,000 feet, everything has to be moved by yaks. And then above ABC, then we get into true mountain camps, where everything is carried by us, the climbers, and our support team, the Sherpa. Pickaxes at 21,000 feet. I'd last like 30 seconds.
They're the backbone of all Himalayan mountaineering, from the first attempts on Everest in 1921 to Sir Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzin Norgay, who became the first people to reach the summit of Mount Everest. The Sherpa were there, and they always have been. Our friends, our climbing partners, and really the unsung heroes of all this climbing.
See up there?
But even with Sherpas by their side, hauling gear and supplies to the higher reaches of the mountain is a punishing and perilous task. From here on, the terrain changes dramatically to vertical ice and rock, and the weather becomes turbulent and unpredictable. This is where the real climbing begins.
Hopefully, this is as full on as it gets.
Yeah.
Every ounce of equipment you bring, you have to really think about, because it's going to be hard to get up and hard to get it back down.
As we climb higher on the mountain, there's big breakages in the glacier. Big chunks of ice that can squish you and knock you right off the mountain. And so even just moving our mountains of equipment from camp to camp is an intimidating challenge.